On Monday evening at 6:15, the doorbell rang. I answered and found my cousin Ralph there. I considered it somewhat peculiar because I am not typically home before midnight. However, I then considered the possibility that Ralph had miscalculated my schedule. I invited him into the house, purchased him a beer, and then we engaged in conversation while watching Monday Night Football. He appeared disconcerted by the absence of my wife, Lois, who had called me around 5 o'clock. Furthermore, she stated that she would be stopping by after work to engage in social drinking with some of her colleagues. Additionally, she informed me that she would be amenable to a beverage upon her return home. I was eager for such an opportunity, as it had been slightly over 3 weeks since Lois and I had engaged in sexual intercourse. Lois appeared to be experiencing a period of sullen behavior, frequently stating that she was too tired, had a headache, or had endured a challenging day at work, accompanied by discomfort in her legs and back. Subsequently, Ralph indicated his intention to depart, and I accompanied him to the entrance and extended my farewells. Upon observing the time, I noted that it was still only 8 o'clock. I procured another beer and resumed my position in front of the television. Later that evening, I awoke in my chair. The beer I had consumed had induced a state of relaxation sufficient for me to fall asleep, which is not a typical occurrence for me. I arose and observed that the Yukon was parked by the road. This indicated that Lois had returned home. I was curious as to why she had not picked me up, so that we could retire to bed. We finally proceeded with our sexual activity. The following day, as I drove home, I reflected on why she was so often looking for a reason to reject me. It is a common male fantasy to believe that he is not good enough for his partner. However, this was my internal monologue. After we began engaging in sexual intercourse for a couple of weeks, Lois inquired if I thought she was too loose. I was uncertain about the question. The question was prompted, and I considered it peculiar that she inquired about it. However, I was not lacking in intelligence, so I provided a false answer, stating that she was not small at all but rather just a little small for me. From a male perspective, it was evident that she was being untruthful. It was imperative to be honest and admit that she was, in fact, a little small for me or to cease this pretense entirely. One might posit that she is larger than any other partner the subject may have had, but it would be unwise to make this a matter of public record. I am attempting to spare the subject's feelings. I was in love with Lois, and when I finally proposed, size was obviously not an issue for her, and she accepted. Even though she married me, the thought of it probably never left my mind. Back to my attempts to wake up sleeping Lois in an attempt to elicit some form of affection, I was met with disappointment when I discovered her in bed asleep after promising me she would be awake instantly. This prompted an intense surge of anger. I had reached my limit with her. Who did you think it was? You are a source of immense frustration. What is the rationale behind this? It is simply you. Who were you engaging with behind my back? I got off the bed and grabbed my shorts. I proceeded to descend the stairs and procure a beverage. I then proceeded to the patio, where I sat and attempted to cool down and process the recent events. It appeared that she had desired it, but upon realizing it was me, she rejected it. The tone of her voice when she said what she said was, that, again. As I sat there, I contemplated the moon and stars. This was the first occasion on which my wife had been absent from the marital home during the evening. I was therefore forced to consider the possibility that she was spending her time in the company of other women. I was unable to reconcile her behavior with her statements. I was also forced to consider the financial implications of hiring a private investigator to ascertain the truth of her actions. Additionally, I considered the possibility that the individual in question was aware of my thoughts. This was evident from the tone of voice I had used and the intensity of my reaction. However, she did not appear to be concerned about what I was thinking. She did not attempt to go downstairs, make excuses, or attempt to reconcile the situation. It seemed as though she was indifferent to my thoughts and actions. Given this observation, I decided to return to the house. I was already awake and had no intention of going back upstairs. I proceeded to enter the house and engage in the act of watching television. I had a tape of the previous week's NCIS episode, so I proceeded to search through the tapes until I located it. It was the sole tape in the collection that was not filled with content. I then proceeded to insert it into the VCR. The video provided a comprehensive explanation of the situation. I paused the video and quietly proceeded upstairs to ascertain whether Lois was in bed. Upon investigating, I discovered that she was already snoring softly. I returned to the downstairs area and resumed my previous activity. As I watched the tape, I observed my wife and my cousin Ralph entering the bedroom. I surmised that the camera was mounted on the top shelf of the closet, affording a view of nearly the entire room. It was evident to me that the two of them had engaged in this act on numerous occasions with various individuals. I was overcome with a sense of betrayal and anguish, questioning how she could have done this to me and the number of men with whom she had been unfaithful. A man stood in front of me with whom I was not intimately acquainted. I was at a loss as to how I had come to deserve this. I heard a voice from behind me, and upon turning around, I saw Lois. She yelled, "God," and hurriedly walked over to the phone, quickly dialing a number while humming. She then proceeded to demand that the phone be answered. "The recording you just made was inappropriate. You should not have taken the tape with you when you left. David is currently watching it." I realized where my NCIS tape was. I stood up and walked over to Lois, who recoiled from me. I took the tape from her. "Please come over here," and retrieved the recording. "Ralph, do not neglect to wear your bulletproof vest when you come to collect it. It would be prudent for you to avoid any future contact with me. I intend to attend all family events from now on, and I hope you will be there as well. I will not waste any time looking for you, but I will come for you someday." He then proceeded to inform her that the day she had been dreading had finally arrived. Islam then thanked Lois and his cousin, stating that their actions had saved him a significant amount of money, as he no longer needed to hire a private investigator. He then proceeded to retrieve the tape and kiss it before placing it on the TV, his hands trembling slightly. Lois inquired as to my intentions. I informed her that I intended to divorce her, but that I did not want a divorce. I then laughed, stating that, based on my observations, it was evident that she did not care about me. I advised her to pack her belongings and leave the premises, as I was on the verge of losing my temper and doing something that I felt she deserved. She exited the room, and as soon as she did, I procured a fresh tape and affixed it to the television. I then transported the damaged tape to the kitchen and proceeded to hit it. After preparing coffee, I took a seat at the kitchen table and began drafting a list of tasks for the following day. Our state did not adhere to a no-fault rule, but I was aware that courts typically adhered to a 50-50th ratio when dividing property, unless the infidelity or criminal act was the cause. The 50-to-1 ratio was a surprising discovery, particularly given that the adultery was not the result of infidelity or criminal activity. I had inherited the house from my parents and had long intended to add Lois to the list of possessions. However, I had never gotten around to it. While I was working on the list, I heard Lois coming down the stairs. A couple of minutes later, I heard the front door open and close. I was perplexed by her sudden disappearance at 2 a.m. In the morning, I was indifferent to the situation. I was perplexed by the sudden transition from love to hate. I reviewed the list and, thanks to the internet, recognized the potential for immediate action. I arose and proceeded to my room. As I traversed the living room, I observed that the blank tape I had placed on the television was no longer there. I experienced a sense of relief, as I was hopeful that she would retrieve the tape and view it to ascertain whether events would unfold in a manner that aligned with my expectations. If they did, I would have grounds to terminate the relationship. I proceeded to my room and accessed my computer, initiating an online search. In the financial domain, I proceeded to transfer the entirety of our joint account balance, with the exception of $10, to a savings account that was solely in my name. This account was established prior to my marriage to Lois, and she had her own account when we got married. However, we never proceeded to consolidate them. Subsequently, I engaged in the credit card business. Given that I was paying bills online, I accessed my account. Furthermore, I terminated joint accounts, specifically American Express and Visa, which were solely in my name. I then proceeded to contact the relevant parties the following morning to ascertain whether the accounts had been closed. Having taken these measures, I retired for the evening, and, remarkably, I slept soundly. The alarm clock woke me up at 7. At 7:45, I had completed my preparations and departed the residence. I had breakfast at 4 o'clock and subsequently proceeded to the financial institution, arriving at 9 o'clock. At 00, I proceeded to the restaurant, where I contacted my workplace to inform the receptionist of my anticipated tardiness. She informed me that my wife had called, requesting my attention. I considered the likelihood of this to be minimal and terminated the call. Upon the bank's opening, I rented a safe deposit box in my name alone and subsequently transferred the contents of the box previously accessible to Lois into my new one. I completed this task. Subsequently, I proceeded to the office, where Myra, my secretary, provided me with a number of message sheets and informed me that Lois was still attempting to contact me. I informed Myra that Lois and I were undergoing a divorce and that I should not accept any messages from her. Myra then informed me that Alan wished to see me as soon as I arrived at the office. I proceeded to my superior's office, where Shirley, his personal assistant, informed me that I should proceed directly to his office. He informed me that I had selected an inopportune time to be late as I entered the room. He stated that I was needed on the next flight to Atlanta. Morgan's company was refusing to sign a new contract, and he required my presence to facilitate a resolution. I informed him that it was not an optimal time for me to leave and provided an explanation regarding the necessity for restraining orders. In order to prevent Joyce from entering the house and potentially stealing the property while I am away, I request that you provide me with your keys so that I can change the locks. Alternatively, you may utilize the services of Bert Ellsworth, who served as my lawyer during my previous divorce proceedings and provided exemplary legal counsel. Contact him and inform him of your intention to call him. Call him on your way to the airport, as Shirley has reserved tickets for you, which you can pick up at the Delta counter. I was unable to decline the offer, as it was a highly desirable position with excellent remuneration. Consequently, I was obliged to proceed to Atlanta, regardless of my personal inclination. I have been informed that I returned home, packed my belongings, ensured the answering machine was operational, and proceeded to the airport. I contacted the attorney Alan had provided me with, requesting to speak with Ellsworth. Upon providing my name, I was promptly connected to him. I elucidated the circumstances and articulated my intentions, after which he proffered counsel. I furnished him with my visa number, ensuring his continued presence at the airport. I then proceeded through the standard TSA procedures, reached the Delta counter, completed the check-in process, and awaited my flight's boarding call. I reflected on the advice provided by the lawyer. I fabricated a reason for needing the warrant, citing an incident in which I had overheard Ralph informing Lois that he would make me straighten up if I revealed their illicit activities. I suggested that I would continue to harass Ralph until he reconsidered his actions. I informed Ellsworth that I had overheard Lois stating that it would be beneficial for me to observe and potentially assist in the process of giving him a once-over, or perhaps two. However, I subsequently realized that this account was not entirely truthful. While it was unlikely that this information would be disclosed during the plea hearing, I believed that it might be advantageous to keep Lois out of the house until I returned. I have a legitimate claim to this right, given the numerous falsehoods she has uttered while entertaining Ralph. God and numerous others are also aware of these instances. Ellsworth stated that it would be relatively simple to obtain a restraining order, but there would be a hearing in 10 days, during which I would have to persuade a judge to make the order permanent. The trip to Atlanta proved beneficial, as I was able to resolve the issue within an hour of meeting with the Morgans. I contacted Alan, who informed me that he had contacted a locksmith and that the locks on the house had been changed. My son-in-law is a deputy sheriff and will watch the house until your return. While in Atlanta, I made a courtesy visit to 2 other customers. Before boarding Flight 720 home, I remembered that I had turned off my cell phone during the courtesy calls and hadn't turned it back on when I did. I discovered that I had 6 missed messages and 3 voicemails. 1 message and 1 voicemail were from Ellsworth, and all the others were from Lois. I deleted her messages and listened to the voice message. The calls and voicemails were similar in content. The caller requested a conversation to prevent further complications. The voicemail from Ellsworth indicated that he had gained access to the court in the afternoon and obtained a protective order. He planned to serve it on Lois at her place of employment the following morning. I was grateful to Alan for suggesting Ellsworth. I arrived home at midnight and, as I exited the vehicle, a man emerged from a car parked at the curb and approached me. He identified himself as a sheriff's deputy and requested identification. He inquired, "You must be Alan's brother." I informed him that I would be leaving my wallet and driver's license with him, thanked him for watching the house, and received a ring and a pair of keys in return. I was then told that Brian had requested that I inform you that all the locks in the house are locked with the same keys, so you only need one key to get into all the locked doors. Your wife arrived at 4:30 and again at 9, and expressed great displeasure when I refused to let her into the house. She indicated that she would call the police if I did not allow her entry. She appeared somewhat surprised when I showed her my identification and informed her that law enforcement had already been dispatched to the scene. Once inside the residence, I observed that the answering machine indicator was illuminated. However, I was fatigued, so I terminated the call and retired for the evening. The following morning, after showering, shaving, and dressing, I reviewed the messages on the answering machine. I was taken aback to discover that they were all from Lois. The content of the messages was as follows. The content of the call was essentially the same. I was advised to refrain from taking any precipitous action, as the situation had already reached a point of irremediability. I reached the office and was informed by Myra that Lois had once again contacted her. Myra relayed that she had been instructed not to engage with Lois and that she was even prohibited from taking messages from her. Lois did not contact Myra again after I leaned over and kissed her on the forehead, saying, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Myra responded with a laugh. "I surmise that you make this assertion to all the women in your life." I proceeded to Alan's office and provided him with an account of the Morgan situation. I also expressed gratitude for his assistance in resolving the lock issue at my residence and for sending me to Ellsworth. "What, then, is your next objective?" he inquired. I responded that I must prioritize my personal life and endeavor to find a compatible partner who will tolerate my shortcomings. "You will undoubtedly succeed. The initial stages may prove challenging, but with time, things will improve." I proceeded to my office and commenced my duties at 9. I contacted Ellsworth, who informed me that the documents would be filed by 10 o'clock and that he could serve them to Lois before lunch if I so desired. I instructed him to proceed at 10 o'clock. Subsequently, without notice, Lois stopped by my office and invited me to have lunch with her. I was in need of a respite, so I consented. We proceeded to converse, and Coys took the available seats. After Mandy took our order, Myra inquired about my well-being. I responded that I was doing well, albeit experiencing the challenges associated with navigating the early stages of a divorce. I elaborated that having a non-involved individual with whom to discuss these challenges can facilitate the process. She then inquired about my candidacy for the position. Given the circumstances, it is evident that a source of positive reinforcement would be beneficial. I am therefore grateful for the gesture. Myra produced a document from her handbag and extended it to me, stating that it was intended to lift my spirits. Upon closer examination, I discerned that it was a list of names. Could it be that this is a register of individuals who are currently interested in me, given that I am once again available? I perused the list and noted a few unexpected entries. Liz Fisher, for instance, was included. Headed Beauty from Accounting. I was under the impression that she was engaged, based on the last information I had. The wedding is scheduled to take place next month. She discovered her fiancé was unfaithful and subsequently terminated the engagement. Given this information, it is reasonable to conclude that she is interested in me. I am aware that she has previously expressed a willingness to pursue a romantic relationship with me. I reviewed the list once more and noted that there were 7 names on it. In addition to Mary, there were 2 other individuals who might be of interest. Are you suggesting that you are aware of their interest in me? I have heard each of them express interest in you. On 2 occasions, I smiled and stated that I had observed that your name was absent from the list. I contemplated including it, but ultimately decided against it. The reason for this is twofold. First, I am married, which is a matter of public record. Second, you have just admitted that you have been contemplating this possibility. The answer to the question of why you are considering dating a married woman who plays is that you are in the process of divorcing your wife, who has been unfaithful to you. I reasoned that, given these circumstances, dating a married woman who plays is the last thing you would want to do. It is worth noting that I had assumed that you and Harold were on solid ground. This was until I discovered that he was engaging in an extramarital affair with the secretary in his office, rather than pursuing a divorce. I chose to maintain a comfortable lifestyle and repay him with kindness. There is one aspect of your assumption that is incorrect. Had I known that you were married and involved with another man, it would not have dissuaded me from pursuing a relationship with you. You would have been an ideal candidate for me at this time. I now realize that you were merely jesting. I am far from the ideal woman for such a relationship. Your assumption is erroneous. There are 3 names on your list that I am interested in, but you possess a quality that they lack, namely, your marital status. This is a factor that you will have to elucidate. An emotional connection is the last thing I require. It would be too simple to become emotionally involved with the 3 individuals on your list that I am interested in. Conversely, you are already engaged, and, as you have acknowledged, you are seeking a sexual encounter. If I were to become sexually involved with your wife, there would be no emotional component. We would simply be engaging in a sexual relationship with no emotional attachment. Are you serious? I am being entirely sincere. I want to make it clear that I am not the kind of man who would pursue a married woman with the intention of seducing her. However, I would be interested in meeting for a long lunch. What are your thoughts on this? I would be open to it. Do we have time today? Unfortunately, I have a meeting with the Hayes people at 2, but I am free later. A clear schedule for tomorrow. It's a date. Was it hypocritical of me to entertain another woman while married to Lois? Considering I had kicked her out for cheating, it was not. According to Ellsworth, Lois had to have the papers by the time I had lunch with Myra. Once Lois got the divorce papers, we would legally part ways, and I would be free to do whatever I wanted at 2:45. My cell phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw that it was Lowell. I knew it was probably because I decided to take the call. What do you need? No greeting. Just what do you need? I was tempted to say, what the hell do you want? However, I figured she already knew how I felt about her. Why can't I get into the house? What the hell is up with this divorce? Why aren't my credit cards working? The protection order. Are you out of your mind? No. Just out of my mind. Your cards aren't working because one of the things you do when you get rid of a wife is. The credit cards should be cancelled. The reason for being unable to gain access to the house is that you are no longer a resident. I do not wish for you to be present in the house. Dave, it is not logical to want to lose half of your assets because of an extramarital affair. That is all it was, Dave. It was merely recreational. There was no emotional attachment involved. I only love you. I do not perceive your actions in that manner, Lois. In my view, you are a person who has engaged in infidelity, and that is why I filed the complaint using adultery as the reason. We need to discuss this matter further. I believe I surprised her when I suggested that we meet at 10 p.m. tonight at the agreed location. I am of the opinion that this is not a viable proposition. I have removed you from the premises and I am not prepared to allow you to return. You are not in a position to prevent me from entering the house. I am the rightful owner of the property. You are not mentioned on the title deeds. My parents bequeathed the house to me, not to you. I will permit you to retrieve the remainder of your belongings, but only after my legal representative has prepared the necessary documentation. The court will be present to ensure that you do not take anything to which you are not entitled. Let us put aside this legal matter and simply sit down and attempt to resolve it. I have stated that I am willing to speak with Lois, but not in this house. You are being entirely unreasonable. Dave, if not in the house, then where? Tomorrow night at Angelina's restaurant at 6, we could take a booth in the back, which would afford us a considerable degree of privacy. I terminated the call, pondering whether Lois genuinely believed I was naive enough to accept, as a mere physical relationship. I only love you, even as this notion crossed my mind. I was aware that the answer was affirmative. Why would she assume I was lacking in intelligence? I was, after all, naive enough to allow her to evade accountability for her actions for years and years. After leaving his place of employment, the subject proceeded to the landing strip lounge, where he consumed a few beverages in an attempt to alleviate his distress. As it was a Wednesday, the establishment was hosting an open mic night, and the subject anticipated that 1 or 2 comedians might provide him with some levity and a sense of optimism. He proceeded to take a seat at the bar, where he was approached by Karen. She inquired about his usual drink order, to which he replied, "I don't know, honey. I typically order a PBR and a date with you, but so far, I've only received a beer." He then informed her that he believed he had found a promising relationship and intended to persevere. I was informed that the entertainment on offer was, in fact, just PBR. On the elevated bandstand, a woman attempted to perform stand-up comedy. A surveyor visited Will's farm in eastern Minnesota and informed the proprietor that he had some unfortunate news. "I have discovered that your farm is not in Minnesota, it is actually located in Wisconsin." I was relieved to hear this news and commented that it was the best I had received in a while. I had discussed with my wife this morning that I did not believe I could endure another winter in Minnesota. She laughed. Furthermore, the New York City Department of Education has reported that only 26% of the city's 3rd through 5th graders pass the English exam. However, they are similarly deficient in mathematics. She responded to this information with a polite laugh but then proceeded to share the next anecdote. A new pastor was visiting the homes of his parishioners. In one of the houses, it was evident that someone was present, yet no one responded to his repeated knocks. Consequently, he removed a card from his pocket and wrote Revelation 3. He affixed the card to the door with tape on the reverse side. The following Sunday, during the offering, he discovered that his card had been returned. He retrieved it and, consulting his Bible, found that the quote was Genesis 3 verse 10. He was overcome with laughter. 20 begins. "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." Genesis 3 verse 10 states, "I heard your voice in the garden and was afraid because I was naked." 2 additional comedians followed, and I departed the venue with a greater sense of well-being than when I initially arrived. Perhaps there is some truth to the old adage, laughter is the best medicine. The following day at work, I had barely taken my seat at my desk when Myra reminded me that we had a lunch date. It was a rather hectic morning, and at 11:30. Myra and I proceeded to have lunch at the Marriott. I inquired as to whether she truly wished to have lunch first, to which she responded with laughter and the assertion that entertaining on a full stomach impedes her ability to function at an optimal level. We registered at the hotel under the names Mr. and Mrs. Ralph Tomlinson. I deemed it fitting to utilize Lois's endearing moniker once within the confines of the room. Once settled on the bed, we proceeded to engage in sexual intercourse. The day passed with remarkable swiftness, and it was now time to proceed to Angelina's to meet Lois. I arrived first and secured a booth in the rear of the establishment, which was situated at the farthest point from the dance floor and therefore afforded the greatest degree of privacy. I ordered my customary dish and took my seat, awaiting Lois's arrival. She arrived 5 minutes later, as was her custom, and, as was her custom as well, she looked exquisite. Typically, seeing her in such a state would have caused me to become entirely unresponsive, but Lois's actions during our marriage had a profound impact on me, effectively extinguishing any desire I might have had to pursue a romantic relationship with her. As she took her seat at the table, the waitress approached and inquired about her drink order. Lois, however, was visibly displeased when I informed the waitress that separate checks would be necessary. I took a sip of my beer and then proceeded to address Lois directly. "You could have been more polite, given the circumstances. Lois, you are fortunate that I have not yet destroyed you. You requested this meeting, so proceed. Alternatively, I will rise and take my leave." She exhaled and stated, "You are overreacting to situations, Dave. Our marriage is not at risk of dissolution. I have always loved you, and I always will. The incident with Ralph is inconsequential. I did engage in sexual intercourse with him, but that is the extent of it. The majority of the encounters were merely sexual in nature. Furthermore, I harbor no affection for him. He has never posed a threat to you or our marriage. If he holds no significance in your life, why did you neglect me to prioritize him? I never did so. You must also consider the past 6 months. How often have you done me favors, albeit reluctantly? Reflect on the past 3 weeks. I have listened to your excuses night after night. You have remained uninvolved throughout this period, engaging in activities with another individual. This is the only way you have defined your relationship with me. It is not as if this has been a recent occurrence. In fact, it has been going on for 3 weeks. You have consistently avoided me, and when you finally deigned to speak with me, you informed me that I was fortunate to have you home. You then proceeded to retire to bed and fall asleep. When I initiated physical contact, you were enthusiastic at first but then became reluctant. I recall that you were the one who initiated this conversation, Lois. It is evident that you are attempting to avoid the subject at hand. I am tired of this evasive behavior. Please leave me alone. Your actions speak volumes. You have already made your intentions clear. The tape recording is the final evidence of your duplicity. Why are you even engaging in this discussion with Ralph? He is merely seeking affirmation. He has an inherent need to hear that he is superior to you. I say these things to feed his ego. There is nothing inherently wrong with Dave as a lover. He has consistently provided me with pleasure. Therefore, I am perplexed as to why he derives enjoyment from engaging in sexual activities with other men. It is not the men themselves that concern me, Dave. It is only Ralph. I am not suggesting that it constitutes infidelity on your part, Dave, since there is only Ralph. However, engaging in sexual activities with a man who is not your husband is, in my opinion, unethical, regardless of one's perspective. Lois, regardless of the number of individuals involved, engaging in sexual activities with a man who is not your husband is unethical. It is, in my opinion, a form of infidelity. I am curious to know your thoughts on this matter. Prior to viewing the incriminating video footage, Dave would likely have asserted that the marriage was, at the very least, satisfactory. However, the evidence suggests otherwise. Dave dated Ralph prior to their marriage, yet this did not negatively impact the stability of their union. Furthermore, Dave's sexual history is not limited to Ralph. He also engaged in sexual activities with Dave's cousin before they were married. This raises the question, why did Dave marry Dave in the first place? The answer seems to be that Dave loves Dave. However, Dave's feelings for Ralph are not nearly as strong. One might inquire as to why you are deriving pleasure from his company. It would appear that he provides you with something that I am unable to provide. Dave, why not view this situation as Ralph merely assisting you with me? It would be illogical to believe that I could be convinced of that assertion. If this is the extent of our discussion, then I am prepared to take my leave. As she began to rise from her seat, she stated, "You will never be able to sell adultery to Dave. You lack the necessary evidence. Furthermore, you are neglecting to consider the fact that I possess the audio recording of your conversation with Ralph. You and Ralph are mistaken if you believe I am unable to provide evidence of your deceit. I am certain of my position and, as I walked away from her on my way out the door, I smiled. It became apparent that she had not listened to the tape she had taken from home, which meant she was unaware that it was blank. As I reached for the car door handle, I heard the sound of heels clicking together and turned to see. Lois was observed to be walking and running in her high heels. It was noted that she was able to move at a considerable pace in them. She proceeded to approach the subject and stated, "I need to get into the house, Dave. I need my clothes and other items." It was recognized that this statement was inappropriate, yet it was believed that the subject had the right to make such a demand. When the subject requested that the other party have their lawyer contact the subject's lawyer to arrange a meeting, the statement was made. I rolled down the window and said goodbye to Lois as I drove off. She then exclaimed, "Wait, Dave. Wait a minute." I could have allowed her to follow me home and retrieve her belongings, which would not have caused me any harm. However, at that moment, I was preoccupied with other considerations. I was of the opinion that it was not worth my time to facilitate her retrieval of her belongings, particularly given that she did not yet have legal representation. I estimated that it would take her at least a day or two to secure counsel, and given that it was Thursday, I was confident that she would not be able to find a lawyer until at least Monday. The most expedient time for her to secure legal counsel would be Monday, but that would require another day to arrange transportation to the residence. By that time, I would have already removed her belongings from the premises and placed them in garbage bags. If I were to exercise reasonable care in doing so, it would be under duress. Fortunately for her, she would have to take her belongings to a dry cleaner or laundromat before she could resume using them. Was I embittered with Lois? No. My relationship with her was characterized by a certain degree of optimism. In my relationship with Lois, I experienced a positive shift in dynamics. On the evening in question, I had the opportunity to engage in a lengthy discourse with Myra on Friday. As we concluded a particularly demanding period, Myra inquired about my weekend plans. When I indicated a lack of specific arrangements, Myra posed the question of whether I would be interested in spending the weekend with her. I expressed enthusiasm for the idea but also highlighted the challenge of maintaining secrecy from Myra's husband, who was planning to go fishing that weekend. He prepared the vehicle this morning and will be departing immediately from his place of employment. I am available to assist you from today until noon on Sunday, if necessary. Regarding the schedule for today, I suggest the following. Dinner and dancing this evening, return home and resume play until morning, then resume play throughout the day on Saturday, followed by dinner and dancing on Saturday night, and finally, return home and resume play until morning, then resume play until noon on Sunday, followed by brunch. Please let me know if this is acceptable, with the exception of the dancing. It is recommended that we engage in more play and less dancing. This approach is unlikely to be effective, as your device never becomes exhausted, while mine requires occasional periods of rest. Therefore, we shall adhere to your proposed plan. Upon returning to work, I informed her that I would collect her at 7 p.m. for the weekend. I did so because I will not be available until Sunday. Upon my return home, I discovered that Lois had chosen not to invest any time in seeking legal counsel. Upon entering the room, I observed that a significant portion of Lois's belongings had been removed. I proceeded to search for the source of this disruption and soon discovered that one of the windows in the family room, which faced the patio, was broken. It became evident that reporting the incident to the authorities would be futile, as I lacked the necessary evidence to prove that Lois was responsible. Nevertheless, I took the initiative to contact a glass company to schedule an appointment for the following day. Some degree of satisfaction was derived from the discovery that blood was present on the shards of glass. It was evident that Lois had sustained an injury while attempting to gain access to the room. Consequently, a decision was made to contact a glass company, which was located via the Yellow Pages. An appointment was arranged for the following day. The subsequent decision was to leave the scene of the incident until the following morning. After showering and dressing for an evening engagement with Myra, the couple proceeded to dine and subsequently engage in dancing and drinking. They retired for the night at 11. I did not fall asleep until 3 a.m., and I was quite fatigued by the time Myra had finished with me. I set my watch for 9, as the glass company had indicated that the repair would take between 10 and 12 hours. I was not concerned about the clock because Myra woke me up at 7:20 a.m. while we were waiting for the glazier. I cleaned up the broken glass and was just finishing when the glazier arrived at 10 o'clock. At 10:40, he concluded his work. By 11, Myra and I had proceeded to Doty's for a late breakfast. After Jared took our order, I inquired of Myra what she would like to do after lunch. She replied that she would like to spend time together, engaging in activities such as love and cuddling. I was amenable to this suggestion, and we proceeded to do so. Our mood was elevated, and by 5, we opted to order pizza and continue our activities from earlier in the day. We abstained from further physical exertion and instead relaxed on the couch, watching television for approximately an hour or two. However, the program was abruptly interrupted by the realization that I would have to return her to her owner. Upon reaching this conclusion, the husband contemplated the situation further over breakfast at the village inn. He inquired about the timeline and the likelihood of his imminent departure. He also questioned the rationale behind this assumption, citing the apparent infidelity and the inconsistent nature of the flirtation. A long-term relationship with anyone was never a viable option for me. In my experience, the men I was intimate with often became possessive and demanded that I leave Harold for them. The issue was that they were not of Harold's caliber. None of them could provide the lifestyle I enjoyed as Harold's wife. I could not fathom leaving a comfortable home in a desirable neighborhood to live in a less affluent one. I was forced to reside in a bedroom apartment, preoccupied with the imminent challenge of meeting this month's financial obligations. Moreover, the majority of these individuals demonstrated a lack of proficiency in sexual intercourse and exhibited a proclivity for untidiness. At least, that was my perception. It was logical to conclude that they were promiscuous given their behavior towards me, a married woman. I consistently wore my wedding rings as a visible indication of my marital status. It is perplexing to comprehend the rationale behind seeking extramarital encounters and subsequently becoming vulnerable to the consequences of being discovered as a married woman. While this may be true, I was not seeking to replace Harold. My objective was merely to retaliate against those who had molested me. Even if the men in question were adept in bed, I did not care about them. If they persisted in their pursuit of me, despite my marital status, I could never trust them. They would simply become another untrustworthy individual. However, I am not just another unscrupulous person. I have been working for you for over 5 years, and in that time, I have demonstrated my reliability. Throughout the duration of our relationship, you have never once initiated any form of romantic or sexual contact with me. It is evident that I have been the one pursuing you. You explicitly stated that you would never engage in a romantic relationship with a married woman, and you have not done so. I extended an invitation for us to engage in a sexual relationship, and you declined. If you were to leave me, it would be for another partner. I can guarantee that if I were to initiate such a departure, it would not be imminent. Do we have sufficient time for one final sexual encounter before I must take you home?" She smiled broadly. On Sunday night, I was gratified to find myself in a state of considerable satisfaction, perhaps even exceeding that of my neighbors. As I drove to work on Monday, I reflected on my relationship with Myra and came to the realization that it could not continue in its current state. I was pursuing a lawsuit against Lois, using adultery as the basis for the suit. If she retained legal counsel, one of his initial actions, if he were a competent attorney, would be to find if she could not counter with something. I would be on the side of property division. If I were caught with Myra, Lois could counter with something, but there was no way I would forego it for as long as the divorce would take. I had already gone without for so long while married to my former wife. When I arrived at work, I called Myra into my office and presented the problem to her. I inquired of her whether she had any ideas. "However, I am unsure if it is feasible to implement. If you could provide me with further details, I would be grateful." The space in question comprises 3 uncomfortable customer chairs. It would be beneficial to install a comfortable couch so that customers can sit on it. I am able to do so. However, you frequently remain at work until late, so I will also need to stay late to assist you. Once the new couch is in place, you will leave, and I will wait for approximately 10 to 15 minutes to allow sufficient time for any observers to leave. One option is to follow me so that they will not see me leave. This should be effective. Alternatively, I will leave for lunch before you go to the hotel. Get a room and call you with the room number when you get to the hotel. Take the elevator to the 2nd floor, where all the conference rooms are located. Then, take the stairs to the floor where the room is located. However, we will not be able to do this very often. There is a limit to how many conferences one can attend without. One might inquire as to what would prevent individuals from ascending to ascertain my whereabouts at a conference. Prior to their ascent up the stairs, it would be prudent to affix a "Do Not Disturb" placard to one of the conference room doors. Nevertheless, it is of no consequence, as they will inevitably require our collective presence. If we emerge and retreat separately, we shall be unassailable. I instructed Myra to arrange the conference for the subsequent day and subsequently dispatched her to her place of employment. I had a demanding schedule, so I did not have the opportunity to procure the couch until approximately 4 o'clock. I did not engage in a protracted process of navigating the approval channels. Instead, I simply placed the order and made the payment at 5 o'clock. I summoned Myra to my office and informed her that she was obliged to inform her husband that she would be required to remain at work later than usual on Thursday. The delivery of the couch was scheduled for around noon. "How did you succeed in making arrangements with Ahern and accounting so expeditiously?" "I did not utilize their services. I purchased it myself." She surveyed the room and observed no one. The door to the office was ajar, and she kissed me. Then she said, "I was hoping I would not have to wait until Thursday. Have you already forgotten about tomorrow's conference with the Ajax Group?" How did it slip my mind? I was in a good mood all the way home, but when I pulled up to the house and saw Lois parked in the driveway, the good mood faded. She had parked in the middle, so I could not drive past her to get into the garage. I parked so she would have room to pull out. She informed me that there was insufficient space to pull out of the parking space when I exited my vehicle. She then proceeded to approach me and request a conversation. She asserted that the situation was becoming unmanageable. I chose to ignore her and instead walked past her to her vehicle, opening the door and entering the vehicle. I then proceeded to grab her purse, which she had left on the vehicle's seat. I turned the purse upside down and dumped its contents onto the seat. I then picked up her purse and removed all the contents. I then removed the money from the purse, counted it, and placed it in my pocket. I then tossed the purse on the seat, atop the other miscellaneous items. "You still owe me $114 for the broken window. There is no need for further discussion. I have already conveyed all of my concerns. I love you, Dave, and I do not wish for a divorce. We can work through this, our marriage does not have to end. However, there are some issues that we will need to address. I discovered that you were deceiving me before we were even married. Our marriage is over. Lois has terminated our union. I had hoped you would consider my perspective, but I realized that you were determined to pursue a divorce. Consequently, I will have to challenge you. I will not accept adultery. I am aware of the legal procedures in this state and I will not accept a 7,030 division of our property when I am allocated a smaller portion. I am sorry that you do not consider it appropriate to punish yourself for your actions towards me. However, the adultery remains a fact. You will have to prove it, Dave, and you cannot do so. It will be your word against mine, and I will deny it all the way to hell and back. I will say that you are simply trying to cheat me out of my fair share of our property. You might even be punished for it. You seem to have forgotten that I have visual proof. Furthermore, you have been engaging in adulterous activities with my cousin. I have not forgotten. I removed the tape from my possession as I was leaving the house and subsequently destroyed it. There is a significant discrepancy between your testimony and the evidence. Without tangible proof, your account will be deemed unreliable. Ralph will be extremely displeased with you. He was relying on that tape, and your destruction of it may result in significant animosity between you and Ralph. He assumed that I was indifferent to Ralph's situation. In truth, I desired what he had, but I was not in need of it. What I needed was him. I gave a shrug and stated that I still owed him $114 for the window. I then turned away from her and proceeded to the house. She did not give up easily. She continued to bang on the door and ring the bell for a considerable length of time. 10 minutes later, she finally departed, and I observed her walking back down the driveway. I smiled, recognizing that she had likely destroyed the tape without first ensuring that it was the correct one. I anticipated that she would soon face unexpected challenges. I hoped that she would seek legal counsel and engage in a protracted legal battle to avoid the divorce. I hoped that she would accumulate significant debt and spend a considerable sum of money on attorney's fees. I estimated the cost of legal representation at $1,000 or more, and I was confident that she would be unable to recover her investment. I slept soundly that night. My Tuesday conference call with the Ajax people went well, and I was in a relatively positive frame of mind when I arrived home from work. The following day, Wednesday, was also relatively uneventful, apart from an impromptu sexual encounter with Myra at the end of the workday. I promptly checked to ascertain that everyone had vacated the premises. I concurred, and upon completion, I reminded her that she was obliged to work late on Thursday on the way home. I resolved to visit my preferred eatery, Landing Strip Lounge. I had forgotten that it was hosting an open mic night on Wednesday. Upon arrival, I experienced difficulty in locating an unoccupied table. Eventually, I secured a seat at the bar. I was fortunate to find an available seat, and I proceeded to take it. As I was seated, Bobby Denton proceeded to hand the microphone to a trailer repair mechanic who worked for Triple T Sales and Service in Franktown. This individual, who resided in Franktown, was quite intelligent. He had obtained degrees in both electrical engineering and mechanical engineering. One day, as he was driving home, he heard a commercial on the radio that he came to understand that the claim was, in fact, a falsehood. He reflected on this, and upon returning home, he sat in his room and devised a plan for a robot capable of deceit. Once he was satisfied with the plan, he proceeded to his basement workshop and began construction. The process took 6 weeks, and upon completion, he initiated a series of tests. It so happened that the robot was present in his living room when his 14-year-old the man's son returned 2 hours later than anticipated. The men inquired as to the reason for the delay. The son explained that he had been engaged in a game of cards with his companions and had lost track of time. There was a lull in the proceedings. The men proceeded to consume beer at his residence and departed the following day. 2 favorable occurrences transpired. Initially, the man's lawyer contacted him and relayed that Lois's lawyer had contacted him and informed him that she was going to. The second occurrence that elicited a positive response was the delivery of my black leather couch. I had selected leather as a material due to the expectation of inevitable semen stains. This proved to be a prudent decision, as Myra and I proceeded to leave a few stains on it later that afternoon. The subsequent weeks passed rapidly, with Myra and I engaging in the activity on 3 or 4 occasions each week. The majority of our interactions occurred on the couch following the conclusion of my workday. However, on 3 occasions, we engaged in these discussions in the conference room. It is important to note that, just as the couch was a superior option to the desk, the bed was a superior alternative to the couch. During this period, Lois contacted me on a near-daily basis, expressing her need for me and stating that I was unable to emerge victorious. She advised me to accept the situation as it was and move on. I could have terminated these calls by acquiring a new cellular device with a distinct number and modifying the number on my residence telephone, but I derived a peculiar satisfaction from informing her that her efforts would be futile. I was aware that she was unaware of the impending developments. Meanwhile, Ellsworth and the attorney Lois had retained were engaged in their own pursuits. I hoped that Myra's lawyer was being compensated on an hourly basis and that he would eventually be held financially responsible for her actions. I had negotiated a flat fee with Ellsworth, so I was indifferent to the length of time this process would take. Ellsworth was aware of the existence of the incriminating tape, however, he did not disclose this information to Lois's attorney. They engaged in a lengthy and contentious negotiation with the other lawyer put forth the argument that Lois would cease her pursuit of a divorce if the grounds were altered from adultery to irreconcilable differences and an equal division of property was agreed upon. This would, in turn, provide Lois with a degree of hope. I informed Ellsworth that he could reduce the price from $7,030 to $6,535, fully aware that she would not agree to such a reduction. Ellsworth stated that he would have to. Ellsworth informed me that he would have to present the judge with evidence of the existence of the tapes before the hearing. He stated that the judge would be extremely displeased if we did not exhaust all possible avenues for settlement before appearing before him. I advised Ellsworth to exercise his professional discretion in this matter, as I was confident that he was adequately qualified to do so. It was becoming increasingly evident to me that Lois had either informed someone of our discussions or was at least aware of them. I suddenly observed the presence of an individual who had not previously been visible to me. Despite the absence of any prior indication of his attention, he appeared to be situated in proximity to my location. It is possible that this perception was the result of my own heightened state of awareness, although it is also plausible that the situation was not as it initially seemed. A week later, I received a communication from Ellsworth. He informed me that Lois and her legal counsel were interested in scheduling a meeting. I instructed him to arrange a suitable time and to notify me of the chosen date. He subsequently contacted me to confirm that the meeting would take place on Friday at 10 o'clock. At 9:30 a.m., I arrived at the meeting, where I discussed the matter with Bert. We agreed that the tape would be presented at the meeting, but I wished to engage in one final act of provocation towards Lois. The meeting commenced with the customary preliminary discussions. Lois denied the allegations of adultery and asserted that I was being unreasonable. In response, I stated, "You forgetting that I have a recording of a conversation between you and my cousin. I was unable to discern any evidence to substantiate your claim. You are aware that your assertion is baseless. I will make you a counteroffer. If you sign the documents immediately, I will agree to a 604th division of assets. This offer is valid for the next 2 minutes if you do not sign. It seems reasonable to posit that the judge will determine the amount of the share himself. I am unwilling to agree with Dave that there is no proof. Indeed, I have a tape of Lois and Ralph, and then Lois did what I was hoping she would do, she became angry and let her mouth hang open. I am disappointed that Dave has not yet acknowledged that I destroyed the tape. The audio tape has incriminated you. You have admitted to committing adultery and then destroying evidence." Her eyes widened as she realized what she had just said. "However, that is not what I had intended to convey. I had offered to be lenient, but you rejected my proposal due to your obstinacy. The court will determine the outcome." Lois's attorney then spoke. "If you do have evidence, you'd better get it out in the open right now." I nodded to Ellsworth and, as he proceeded to engage the playback function on the television video recording device, which was situated at the end of the table, I stated, "This is your final opportunity, Lois. I am prepared to concede a 60-40 split, but as soon as he initiates the playback function, the offer is null and void, and we will proceed to court. I am at your disposal, Dave. You have no evidence to present. Use Bert. Hit the play button." I stood up and said, "I will see you in court, Lois," and left the room. I had not even exited the building when my phone rang. It was Bert. "They want to make a deal." I declined. I provided her with an alternative course of action, but she did not accept it. I continued to receive numerous phone calls from Lois. I had disconnected the house phone, and Myra was aware not to transfer calls from Lois to me. Therefore, the only way Lois could reach me was via my cell phone, which I retained. I retained the telephone number and continued to ignore Lois's calls. Myra was a significant source of stress, but I did not voice my concerns. 3 days after the meeting with Lois and the lawyers, Myra informed me that we had a problem. A significant issue has arisen. I had presumed that Harold had discovered our relationship. How problematic is this? Harold is required to return to Ohio to resolve matters pertaining to his parents' inheritance. He will be absent for approximately a week. What are the implications for our time together? I considered this for a moment. He then suggested that I leave work a half hour before him and drive to his house. I was to park a block away and then go inside and ensure that all the curtains and blinds were tightly closed. When he arrived home, we would proceed with our plan. I would leave for work in the morning, and if I was being followed, the curtains and blinds would be pulled. If you wait 10 or 15 minutes to let me free, then you leave and go to work. We can repeat this until the weekend. At that point, we can come up with another plan. For example, we could have a weekend plan like this: I do the same thing I do all week except on Friday. When you get home, we just don't leave the house all weekend. Can you handle 2.5 days with me? I am unsure if I can survive 2.5 days with you. We will only know if we try. We did, and I managed to get through the weekend. However, the weekend was so enjoyable that I became somewhat moody when it ended. Once the weekend was over, Myra returned home to meet her husband upon his return. I had become accustomed to Myra's presence, among other things. She was a source of companionship and we had a strong rapport. However, I was sufficiently self-aware to recognize that once my divorce was finalized, I would be seeking a replacement for Lois. I enjoyed the experience of being married. I desired a fulfilling relationship, one in which I could fall asleep at night in the arms of a woman who would be there for me in the morning. I could well imagine having that with Myra, but Myra never made it clear that she would ever leave Harold. It was my impression that she was content with him, except for his tendency to prioritize her, and was willing to remain with him for as long as she could reciprocate his affections. I recalled the list she had shown me that had initiated our affair. It contained the names of 3 men, but none of them were 2 of the men on the list smoked, and I did not. Additionally, I was living with my parents at the time, and I was aware that I could not coexist with a smoker. Both of my parents smoked 2 packs of cigarettes per day, and the house consistently emitted the odor of a wet ashtray. The scent lingered in the clothes, furniture, curtains, and beyond. The only non-smoker on the list was Liz from accounting. She was the most attractive of the 3, but I considered her too young for me. The age difference made it unlikely that we would have sufficient common ground to sustain a long-term relationship. The smoker was Liz from accounting. She was the most attractive of the 3, but I considered her to be too young for me. The age difference meant that we were unlikely to have sufficient common ground to sustain a relationship. I visited her office once to clarify a point on one of my expense reports, and she was listening to rap music, which I find disagreeable. It might be enjoyable to engage in brief interactions with Liz, but I doubt that we could maintain a long-term relationship. These were the thoughts that occupied my mind as I drove to work on Monday. Once at work, I was too preoccupied to pursue any further contact. I was preoccupied with personal issues and therefore unable to accept Myra's invitation to lunch. I received a call from Bert Ellsworth shortly before leaving work. He informed me that Lois was eager to resolve the matter. While I am aware that hammering it out is the optimal solution, I believe it would be prudent to offer her $6,040 sign right now. Adultery often plays a significant role in determining the distribution of assets in such cases. However, it is important to note that 2 out of 7 divorce judges are women, and they tend to offer $5,050. Irrespective of the rationale, we may be unfortunate enough to encounter one of these instances. It would be prudent to reach a settlement. After contemplating the matter for approximately 30 seconds, I advised him to propose an offer of $65 and $35 to ascertain her acceptance during the period of involuntary absence. Myra subsequently entered the office and stated, "I did not receive my scheduled lunch period, so I request some time on the couch." She was granted this request the following morning at 10 o'clock. Ellsworth called to inform me that he had accepted the $6,535 offer. He stated that she would be in on Wednesday at 5 o'clock to sign the necessary paperwork and requested a brief meeting with me. I saw no benefit in attending, except that it would provide me with another opportunity to speak with Sasser. However, I was eager to conclude the matter and avoid further involvement with Myra. I informed Bert that I would be present at 2 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, we proceeded to the conference room, where I took a seat while she awaited my response. She observed that I was not going to initiate further discourse, so she took a moment to collect her thoughts before articulating her decision. She stated, "I don't want this, Dave. I recognize that you may not fully comprehend my perspective, but I am committed to this relationship. Perhaps we can find a way to reconcile our differences. It is not feasible for us to remain together. After learning of the duration of your extramarital activities, I must be frank, if you had engaged in a brief affair, I might have been able to accept it. However, you had multiple affairs before you were married and then remained a faithful spouse for years until you somehow remembered. One indiscretion and a brief affair with him I might be able to get over, but a permanent affair before we even said yes to each other, there is no possibility of reconciliation. Lois, there is no way we can address this. The men you say you barely like, you give him love, and the men you profess to love can go 3 weeks without love. 2 months without love is an untenable situation for Lois. She has made her feelings clear, she wants a chance, she wants to be given the opportunity to prove herself. Dave, she is asking for trust, for a chance to rebuild their relationship. She is not willing to live in a state of distrust and unhappiness. She has made her feelings clear, and now she is leaving. I must concede, Lois, that your prospects of remaining unaccompanied for an extended period appear limited. Should you succeed in forming a relationship, I can only hope that your new partner will treat you as poorly as I have treated you. I excused myself from the room and proceeded to the landing strip. I took a seat at the bar and Karen approached, placed a PBR in front of me, and inquired as to my whereabouts. A divorce and a lack of social interaction led me to believe that I would stop in for a beer or two and unwind. I considered whether my divorce would enable me to woo you with my charms. I had been flirting with you for years, and you had always told me how great you were with your boyfriend. I had been doing well. However, this was merely because I had assumed he was something he was not. I had reached my limit and signaled to Karen to settle my bill. She took my money and, upon returning with the change, smiled at me and said, "When this divorce is finalized, don't forget about me." I could do that. Take care of yourself. I then proceeded home. I was in a highly positive frame of mind. Karen had expressed interest in me, which was an unexpected turn of events. Once Lois had signed the relevant documentation, the process was complete. Despite the decision to wait for a final resolution, I was able to move forward with my life. For me, this entailed freedom from the constant worry of being watched. Myra and I could cease our clandestine activities at approximately 10 p.m. Myra entered the office and inquired as to whether we were planning to have a lengthy lunch together. I informed her that I would be departing at approximately 11 o'clock. 20, she said. Get a room. That won't be necessary anymore, I replied. Lois signed the papers yesterday, so we don't need to try to avoid something that might not have happened. We left for the Marriott at 11:30 p.m., as the door to room 4003 closed behind us, we jumped on the bed, still in our dressing gowns. Myra asked what we should do next. I replied that I was not sure, but that I would be available as long as she wanted me. However, I added that I would eventually want to find a wife. She asked what qualities she should look for in a wife. I suggested that she should be attractive, loving, strong enough to put up with me, and a good cook. I added that I was able to cook. I paused for a moment to process her words. When I finally spoke, I said, "If you meet the qualifications for this position, I will move your application to the top of the list. However, there is one condition: I will not participate in bigamy." She looked at me with a confused expression, and then it dawned on her. She smiled widely and said, "Don't worry, love. He doesn't know it yet, but Harold is history." Then, a thought hit me, and Myra saw the look on my face change. She asked, "What's the matter, kid? What's wrong?" "We just came to thee at this juncture, we are no longer obliged to conceal our activities from Lois. However, we must now maintain secrecy from Harold while you navigate the complexities of your divorce proceedings. I may be mistaken, but I do not anticipate that this will be necessary. I will present him with 2 options, adultery or irreconcilable differences. I possess sufficient evidence to substantiate the former, and if I pursue this course of action and declare my intention to make this information public, he will likely swiftly acquiesce to the latter. Harold is ascending the corporate ladder and aspires to a position of vice presidency. The CEO is a devout born-again Christian, as are several members of the board. It is unlikely that Harold would fare well if I were to reveal his infidelity. It might result in a brief period of homelessness for me, but we are prepared to handle such a scenario. Myra's plan was effective, and she acted promptly to implement it. She contacted Elwet my recommendation and scheduled a meeting for Friday. She requested that Bert prepare 2 sets of documents, one for adultery and one for irreconcilable differences. At 11, on Saturday, just before the bank closed, she withdrew half of the funds from the checking account, all of her savings, and 4 of the 6 certificates of deposit from the safe deposit box. She then returned home, packed her belongings, and left Harold, who had gone to gamble for gold, to carry the remaining items to the car and move into the motel room by 3 o'clock. At 10 p.m., she returned home, prepared a meal, opened a bottle of wine, and informed Harold of her knowledge of his extramarital affairs. She presented him with 3 pie reports, indicating her intention to divorce him. She also informed him of her financial decisions, including the transfer of her share of the house to him. She considered this an equitable arrangement, given that her share of the house was worth more than the amount she had borrowed from the bank. She provided him with divorce papers and outlined his options. She gave him until 10 p.m. to decide. On Monday morning, he was to inform her of his decision and then leave the house, smiling because she had left Harold the dirty dishes. She was not surprised when Harold called her on her cell phone and told her he would prefer to go down the path of irreconcilable differences on Wednesday. They met in Bert's office, and Harold signed the necessary documents. On the dotted line, Myra opted to remain at the motel for the weekend to allow time for the situation to stabilize. Subsequently, she relocated to my residence, where we planned to cohabitate until the dissolution of our marriages was finalized. Once that occurred, we would address the subsequent challenge. Myra was highly proficient in her profession and was reluctant to relinquish it. The issue was that the company we were employed by had a policy that prohibited family members from working together. We could both continue to work for the company, but one of us would have to transfer. The closest company facility we could transfer to was 90 miles away, which was not a viable option for us. Therefore, we decided to simply not inform that we decided to continue working for the company, despite the policy prohibiting family members from working together. Myra would retain her surname and health insurance, while I would assume her role. We would maintain this arrangement until we were discovered, at which point Myra would resign and seek alternative employment. She was not compelled to work, given the substantial remuneration I received for my contributions. She vacated the motel on Sunday and took up residence with me by 3 p.m. The time was 12 a.m. The subsequent 2 months elapsed with minimal incident, allowing me to relax and lower my guard. This proved to be a miscalculation. Lois contacted me on 1 or 2 occasions each week, and I typically responded to demonstrate my disinterest. I should have anticipated that she would persist in her efforts to contact me. It was Wednesday evening, and Myra and I were at the landing strip, where we had consumed a few toddies. We had visited the establishment on numerous occasions, not exclusively on Wednesdays, as it had long been my preferred venue. However, that evening, we were there primarily to support a colleague who was performing. We were there to cheer her on and provide moral support. While Shelley was adequate, we believed she would be better served by maintaining her current position and avoiding the pursuit of a career in show business. The scene opens with a man reading the daily paper. When his wife approached him and struck him with a frying pan, he inquired as to the reason for her actions. His wife responded that it was in response to the piece of paper she had discovered in his pants pocket, which bore the name Jenny. The husband then referenced the horse named Jenny that he had bet on at the races the previous week. His wife apologized and she continued her domestic duties. 3 days later, the man was watching television when the wife approached and struck him with an even larger frying pan, rendering him unconscious. When he regained consciousness, he inquired as to why she had struck him again. The wife replied that it was because of the horse. After a brief period of polite laughter, the assembled crowd listened intently as she continued. The elderly couple had been married for many decades, despite their mutual animosity. Their frequent disagreements often resulted in prolonged shouting matches that continued well into the night. The old man would often proclaim, "When I die, I will dig my way out of my grave and come back to haunt you for the rest." The neighbors were intimidated by the man and believed he practiced black magic due to the numerous strange occurrences in the neighborhood. The old man enjoyed being feared by others, and he died of a heart attack at the age of 85. His wife's funeral was held with a closed casket, and after the burial, she went to a local bar and began celebrating. She proceeded to a local bar and began celebrating with great enthusiasm. Neighbors, concerned for her safety, inquired, "Are you not afraid that he might actually dig himself out of the grave and return to haunt you?" The wife set down her glass and responded with laughter, "He can dig himself out if he wants to. I've buried that old man upside down, and I know him well." It was evident that he would not cease his actions without assistance. While the aforementioned scenario was satisfactory, it was imperative for the woman to maintain her employment. Bobby Denton was in the process of introducing the subsequent image when I became aware of a liquid substance landing on my person. I heard a voice uttering the words, "Keep your hands off my man. You damn fool," in a tone that indicated a lack of civility. I turned to locate the source of the voice and observed Lois advancing behind us. Before I could intervene, Myra proceeded to pour her drink over the head of the other woman. In response, the latter threw her drink in Myra's face. As a result, the former fell to the floor. I then proceeded to remove Myra from the situation and escort her out of the door. I had previously stored some rags in my trunk and retrieved them to begin wiping myself and Myra dry. By the time I had finished, Lois had emerged from the door, exhibiting signs of being unsteady on her feet. Her feet had made contact with her nose after striking a beer bottle. My cousin Ralph, who goes by the nickname Rotten Son of A, __, provided assistance by helping her to her feet. I immediately released the rag from my hands and yelled at him. He released his hold on Lois, who fell to the ground, and then took off running. I pursued him for 3 blocks before I ceased the pursuit and returned to. Upon my arrival at the strip parking lot, I observed that Myra had Lois pinned against the fender of the car. As I approached them, I noted that Lois was crying and Myra was screaming in her face. I then proceeded to verbally reprimand Myra, stating, "You need to understand that I did not steal the item from you. You discarded it, and I was fortunate enough to retrieve it." I proceeded to approach them, subsequently moving away from Lois. I then suggested that we depart from the scene and enter the vehicle. I informed her that I needed to enter the establishment and address the situation with Joe, who is the proprietor. I proceeded to enter the premises, locate Joe, and inquire about the necessity of addressing the issue. He responded that there was no requirement for me to take any action. Instead, he advised me to do so during the intermission. The customers have something to observe when no one is speaking into the microphone. Upon returning outside, I found Lois waiting for me at the entrance. A brief examination revealed Myra waiting in the car. Lois proceeded to approach me and request that I relinquish the divorce. She stated that she was in a state of distress, that she required my presence, and that she loved me. She also expressed her belief that we could resolve the situation. Lois's professed love for me while we are both for the evening is the cause of our divorces. Furthermore, she was foolish enough to pay attention to the fact that we were together. She needs to let it go. The only feelings I have for her I was overcome with a sense of revulsion and disdain. I proceeded to walk around her, subsequently entering my vehicle and driving away. Both divorces were finalized. I proposed to Myra and was taken aback when she replied, "Ask me again in a year, baby. By then, we'll have lived together long enough to ascertain whether we're compatible." I gave it a year and then inquired again. She responded affirmatively, indicating that both she and I had previously undergone a large wedding ceremony and were disinclined to repeat the experience. Consequently, we opted for a civil ceremony and a justice of the peace. Lois and Ralph were married, but the marriage did not last 2 years. It appears that Ralph engaged in sexual relations with multiple women, and one of them transmitted a sexually transmitted disease to him, which he then transmitted to others. Lois's infidelity was not a cause for concern, however, her subsequent betrayal was a different matter entirely. After 6 years, Ralph had the audacity to attend a wedding that I had previously attended. I had kept my promise to him, but he had not kept his to me. I would like to express my gratitude to those who have taken the time to listen to today's discourse. If you have derived any benefit from this account, I would be grateful if you could express your appreciation by liking it and subscribing. Should you have a narrative to share pertaining to your own experiences or those of another individual, I would encourage you to contact me.